Welcome to NYC Round, the podcast for curious startup founders. In each episode, I dive deep into the learnings and mistakes made by the world-class investors and operators who have helped make the New York City tech ecosystem what it is today. This week's guest is Alexa von Tobel. She's the founder and managing partner of Inspired Capital, a $900 million pre-seed to Series A venture fund based here in New York. Alexa is a New York City tech legend and previously founded LearnVest, a financial planning startup that was later acquired by Northwestern Mutual. We cover everything from her journey building and exiting LearnVest, the common mistakes she observes founders make as an investor today, as well as tips and tricks she has for founders that are building in this era of AI across hiring, sales, and go-to-market. Alexa, thank you so much for taking time out today. Have a lot to cover. We're going to talk about everything from LearnVest to what you're doing at Inspire today. But I was talking to some founders out in the common area earlier, and a lot of them were curious about your take on, I got several people asking me this question. We just had a rate cut. We're going to have a few more probably. How does that impact your view as an investor in the ecosystem right now?
Yeah. So I think just, first of all, I'm so excited. We're going to open it up to Q&A, so please do have questions. If you think about interest rates, when we were effectively at like close to zero interest rate environment, what that would mean is if you were on like the conveyor belt where you were at the airport, you know, the one that where you can walk faster, the world was just easier, right? Things are less expensive. To borrow money, to get access to money was very inexpensive. The Fed does it on purpose to be able to, help the economy go quickly and open up more opportunities. Obviously, rates right now are really expensive. So what does it mean? It means everything is harder. I feel for anybody in this room building a business right now because it is harder. It just mathematically is harder. And I think what hopefully is going to happen is my point of view is that the Fed will continue. I actually was just with somebody who Ben Bernanke reports into because my business partner is Penny Pritzker. I think what happens over the coming year and a half plus is that interest rates continue to get cut. Where they stop, none of us know, but maybe around 3.5%. And we're going to kind of normalize. So what that does mean is things will get easier. But money will not be as cheap as it was for that window of time in 2015 and beyond where things were just really, really inexpensive. And I think that's a good thing. I actually think that's a really good thing, which is building businesses should be hard. It should be hard because you want to make sure you have interesting, unique insights that were very hard to find and that you can then have trade secrets and your own protection. Whereas if everything's really easy, everybody can always compete with you. And so in some ways, it's not a bad thing. So that's how I think about it.
That makes sense. Transitioning. So you started LearnVest, and there were a couple questions here, but you dropped out of Harvard to start LearnVest. A couple questions. First is, what was it like telling family and friends that you did that?
Well, so to be super specific, I was Harvard undergrad and then I went to Harvard Business School, and I was one of the weird kids that they let in when I was super young. I was like roughly 2021. I got an HBS and I remember being like, well, that's dumb. I don't have anything to talk about. So I deferred. And I went back in the fall of 2008 and I had been working on LearnVest at that point. I founded LearnVest in May of 2007. I had a year and a half business plan. My boyfriend at the time, his dad was my lawyer. And my mom was the president on the document. I now married that guy, so he's my husband now. But I'd been building the business nights and weekends, and I went to HBS, and I was there when Lehman Brothers went under. And I remember, and the vision for LearnVest was financial planning. So think TurboTax for financial planning. Every American should be able to get access to a financial plan. It should be affordable. And right now, the way the asset management world is set up is if you have a lot of money, lots of people want to give you advice. That is so messed up. If you have no money, no one wants to give you advice, but then you actually need more advice to have money. And I was just like, this is really not an okay thing. And I want to fix it. And it got under my skin. I was very infected by the problem. And so when Lehman Brothers went under, I was on an elliptical machine and two of my friends from Lehman Brothers called me absolutely in tears being like, I just lost I have no job. I don't even know how to pay my bills. And I was like, this is the moment to go launch this platform. It's like when the risk is the highest is actually the best time. So I always say when the world zigs, zag. And so I dropped out. You asked what was it like to call people. People thought I was a lunatic. It was not cool. There was one person of all of my group of friends. They were all like, you have a perfect resume. Why on earth would you throw this all away? And I remember being like, I think the bigger risk is if I don't do this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And for me, that's very clear. I had one friend who was like, high five, go do this. She's now an entrepreneur and runs a really successful company. But then I moved to New York, and I remember laptop went up and I just started building, and I never looked back. But it was terrifying. It truly was. I really was like, I had no money. I had no capital committed to me. I actually started the company just down this street. New York City did not have world-class capital partners at the time. It was 2008. And I remember being like, this is New York goddamn City. Like, where is the world-class capital that is ready to just write me checks? That's why I started Inspired, because I said to myself, one day I will come back and build the fund that I wish existed for me with the force of nature of the capital that entrepreneurs really need. But yeah, so it was a dark day, and then I never looked back.
So in those instances, you're looking for any signal that you're on the right path. What were those signals for you?
Again, I had done so many customer interviews, and I always joked, almost to this day, and I won't make everyone sure. There are very few people in the world that you can say, how do you feel about money? And they're like, I feel great about money. I love it. I feel safe. I feel secure. I don't even care if you have hundreds of millions of dollars. Money stresses you out. Nobody feels good about it. And so I was just convinced that there was a brand to be built, helping people feel like they had the extra layer of protection around money. And actually, I was like, money is not delightful. In fact, it's extremely stressful. And so I had this North Star of, let's make it accessible to tens of millions of families. Let's make sure that it could even be delightful. There could be parts of the product. In under a minute, we build you a full financial plan. I became a certified financial planner, wrote best-selling books on the topic because I was like, I have to get really good at this. But that was really our North Star. And what gave me the comfort was I was customer number one. I was really building a product that I wish existed. But then the more I talked to every human being that would talk to me, and I remember joking at cocktail parties, I'd be like, you don't want to talk to me. Just don't come talk. We're going to talk about money. And you don't want to talk about money. So just go get a drink. And my husband was like, literally, financial planning is the most boring topic on the entire planet. But I was obsessed.
No, that makes sense. Well, I'm curious about that. Like, if you were starting LearnVest again today instead of back when you started it, what would you do differently? Before we hear their answer, I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody for being a part of the NYC round journey since we got started earlier this year. For more founder and investor-driven content, like and subscribe. Now back to the interview.
So in some ways, starting LearnVest back in 2007, 2008, and I really ran it till we sold it in 2015, or till I sold it in 2015. It was actually easier in some ways because there were no plan Bs. There was nothing. It was like I remember trying to raise my seed. There was one fund in New York that would give you $25K. That you do like 9 meetings to get $25K. And I remember being like, this is insane. I'm working so hard for $25,000. But then nobody else, like even first round at the time, was your A. So it was like between standing up the company, and I had no savings. I put all my own savings into the company, and I was like, I'm tapped out. So you just had to build revenue and product and pay bills and figure things out. And so in some ways it was easier. Now you can raise, and then you have to prove all these things. There was just no plan B. I just had to start building the business. And then the other thing is, it was the bottom of the worst recession in 81 years. So anyone who wanted to come work for me also knew I couldn't really pay them. And so you just had a lot of people who would work really, really hard for very few dollars because it was just such a tough economic environment. And so in some ways, I always use this analogy where it's like starting a company in 2008 was like being on a treadmill where you just had to run at like 14 miles per hour. And I don't know about you guys, but that would be really fast for me. If I'm running, I'm like barely on the treadmill. Whereas like if you started in 2015 with ZERP and everything else, you could actually be like walking on the treadmill and it looks like good things are happening. And actually in the rearview mirror, it was that culture, because that's DNA. Remember, culture eats strategy for breakfast? Our culture was like everything matters, every dollar matters, every day we must throw up points because otherwise we don't get to live again. And it was just so inculcated in the strategy. So people would stay at the office until 11, midnight. I didn't have to ask them. It was just like, we know that we want to continue building this business and we don't have another plan. So in some ways that was easier. And there wasn't a lot of competition for talent. I wasn't worried another startup was going to, there was no fintech. I was one of the first fintech companies. So there was, people weren't trying to steal my employees. And I'm really proud of the team we built. It was an incredible team. But so in some ways it was easier, though it was much harder.
That makes sense. You've brought up the New York tech ecosystem and how it's changed a couple times. I interviewed Ben Sun at Primary, and I asked him about the history of NYC Tech. He brought you up by name, and he said one thing that people may not appreciate about the financial crisis, worst global crisis we've had in a century, it's sort of it gave the ability or the it made it culturally okay in New York to go pursue tech. These brilliant people in finance, he gave you by name, that were working in finance that can then go transition to be founders. What was it like building at that time as a founder? Like, paint the picture for us. How is
Yeah,
it different?
yeah, so first of all, sometimes I use this lens, which I just want to say because I think it's a really valuable one if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Um, Undergrad, I worked in the happiness lab in college, and they would take people who are 90 and ask them, "What would you change about your life?" And no one ever changed anything they did. No one. You're like, "I don't care about the boy I kissed. It was fine. Doesn't matter. Don't regret it." You always regret the thing you don't do. And your brain is really set up for that. And in fact, it's the swing you didn't take, the person you didn't mend a relationship with. So our brains are wired to regret the thing you don't do. So if you kind of know you're an entrepreneur in your heart, then the regret machine is very expensive. And I always joke that 90-year-old Alexa sat on my shoulder and that she is like a tough cookie. And she was like, "Girl, you got to do it. Like, you got to go for it." And so to be honest, I almost dropped out of my senior year of college. My mom was like, "Please, God, just graduate." And so when I dropped out, at HBS, my mom was like, I saw this coming. And to your point, it was the bottom of the worst recession. It was like everyone was getting laid off left, right, and center. So you weren't really like, "Oh, that job over there looks great." You're like, all these jobs look
Because you
tough.
brought up one of your friends saying, like, your resume is perfect. Why would you do this?
But actually, that for me was my biggest fear. Because I was like, if I stay at HBS, I'm going to get some job offer from Goldman Sachs that's going to pay me so much. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I was born in Kentucky, not like a fancy New York City kid. And I was like, that I'm going to have so much trouble saying no. So I got to opt out before I'm faced with that really impossible choice. And so just I'll drop out today. And that's literally what I did. I was like, "Today, how's today?" And then I didn't look back. But it was so freeing. That's the other thing. When you finally are in the lane of doing what you're meant to do, which many of us in this room have been in a career where you're doing the thing you're not supposed to. You're like, "I'm not that good at it." And no one else is telling me I'm good at it. And this is miserable. And you feel it. And Sunday nights, you drink a whole bottle of wine by yourself because you're like, "I hate Mondays." When you're doing the thing you're meant to do, literally, I come to life, building LearnVest. I worked every minute. I slept thinking about the company. Same for Inspired. And I'm the happiest I've ever been because I feel so self-actualized. So I always tell people, find the thing that you're meant to do in the world and just do it. And don't look back, and you will feel the best that you possibly can in terms of your self-actualization.
Of that, you talk about choices and mistakes from your investor lens. What are the most common mistakes you see founders make?
I think the hardest thing that most founders do is sign up for something that is not your life's work. Um, and that's really hard. And actually, I'm sure everyone saw Jensen, the NVIDIA founder, being he's 50 years later, wouldn't have done this.
Yeah, let's get show of hands. Has everybody seen that video with Jensen?
Yeah, where he's just like, "This is it." And truly, guys, there were days where the pain tolerance, where it was four really bad things happened at once, and the first one already made me cry, and then by the third or fourth one, I was like, I just have to go home. I have to leave the office. I used to leave the office some days 3 p.m. because I was like, I can't put one more foot in front of the other today. I was like, and so I had a rule. I was like, I will always show up first thing in the morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and I will give 150% every day, 7 days a week. But there will be days where I leave the office, maybe by 10 a.m. because so many things where I'm like, I don't think I just need to go home. I need to exercise. I need to sleep through the night, and then I can tackle it tomorrow. But I think I again, it really is the unknowns. And so I think the biggest risk that some founders take, I always tell people, if you don't love fashion, don't start a fashion company. If you're not obsessed with nuclear energy, God, don't go into nuclear energy.
Because of the bad moments.
Because
That's what you'll lean on.
because in those moments, you will be like, "Why am I doing this? I feel sick to my stomach. I could actually throw up. I feel so sick, or I'm so stressed that I never wanted to quit. Not one day, not 1 hour, not 1 minute. It did not cross my mind. It was, and I thought about this in the rearview mirror after selling it and all this. I was like, there was not one day, not one, where I considered quitting. And I think about it all the time, and tons of founders confiding in me being like, I don't know if I should keep going. And I'm like, what makes you ask that question? I think what makes that, and for me, I set out to build LearnVest because I saw this problem that I was like, I have to fix it. And I feel the same way about Inspired. So not one day, on the hardest of days, I'm like, I'm ready to go. I'm like, you don't challenge me. Let's go.
That's pretty funny because you did mention, I think it was your husband who said like personal finance, like that topic. But for you, it was like, yes, like this is what I want to do every single day.
I like nerded out. It
Yeah.
was, again, you didn't want to talk to me for like 5 years. But it was good.
So startups rarely look like they do in the beginning as like 5 years on, like when you're investing in pre-seed. Chances are the company that it is today is not going to be the one it is 5 years from now. So as an investor, how do you think about market timing for an idea?
Yeah. So let's take Row, right? We were one of the first investors in Row. I'd known Everett for 11 years. And first, Everett stood out to me. I was like, and I actually just told him this. He just left. And I said to him, I go, you were one of the steadiest, sturdiest founders and CEOs. And I knew that in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you would be doing the same thing. I just knew it. I like knew it as a constant. And then again, think about, you want to back businesses where the market opportunity is wild. Business banking is not getting smaller. It is getting globally bigger. And the market share of the competitors, Ramp, et cetera, was 1%. So you're like, even if they're 3%, they're massive businesses. And so there's so much room to go steal from the incumbents. And then incumbents tend to have trouble attracting this room, the brightest and smartest human beings. And so that but really the constant is the founder, is the CEO.
That makes sense. How do you evaluate whether an idea is scalable or not?
Great question. You know, first of all, you can do you do so much diligence. You talk to customers, you can run models. I'm pretty good at math. We run a lot of models. But you kind of get a sense of like, different than scalable, we look for businesses that have multiple chapters. And this is something we kind of came up with, where we regularly look for businesses where when you summit chapter 1, it unlocks chapter 2. And when you summit chapter 2, it unlocks chapter 3 and 4. And so these businesses that have these hard-earned unfair advantages where they keep, as they get bigger, they get better. They have pricing power, or they have competitive moats, or they have a reason that they can offer a new product that nobody else can. And so that we spend more, it's less on like, is this scalable? It's more of, is this one of those unique business models where if that hard-earned insight early really works? The other thing that Inspired, we spend a lot of time thinking about, which I love, is it's okay for businesses to be, I'm an investor in Airtable, Howie. He's fabulous. He spent 3 years alone banging against the product, and like a lonely 3 years working really, really hard. And you want businesses where, again, the founders have hard-won insights, reasons to win, a personal reason why they are the best expert for that business, or uniquely set up to win. And then kind of going from that to 10 million of revenue is sort of turning the wheels on, and call it 10 to 50 million of revenue is like the go-to-market teams are starting to put in place. But the founders are putting in incredible scaffolding, really smart scaffolding, not duct tape, scaffolding. And by the time you get to 100 million of revenue, you can actually grow really quickly, and no one can catch you because you've built the business properly, you built scaffolding. And a lot of founders get to about 100 million of revenue and the wings are flying off. Like the duct tape is like, stretching. And so we always say we're extremely patient capital. I know a lot of investors say that, but we're really unique. We have some of the world's best capital partners behind us that think in decades. And so we think in decades. And so we look at businesses and we're like, in the first 5 years, it'll do this. In the second 5 years, it'll do this. And the following, it'll do this. And let's just not take shortcuts. And I think in life, shortcuts rarely work. I mean, everyone knows that. You turn around, you take the shortcut, and then you get punched in the face later for taking the shortcut. So we always tell our founders, don't take the shortcuts. We're behind you. Like, let's look the devil in the eye. Let's do the hard thing now. Let's swallow the big pill now. Use the analogy, whichever analogy, but don't take the shortcut. Let's build the business properly so that by the time we get to tens of millions of revenue, we can rip and build in a really, really powerful way. So that's our philosophy on scaling as well.
That makes sense. I was going to ask you about how you assess the competitive landscape and a potential investment. I think a more useful question for this audience is, if you're a founder and you constantly are asked, why are you better than your competition? Who is your competition? What are the right frameworks to use when answering that question with an investor audience?
I mean, I think it's really important. Again, you got to know who your competitors are. I always like to ask, not just like, who's your competitor? I'm like, who's the one you're watching? Who's the one you're thinking about nightly? Who's on your dartboard? Sometimes I think it's really good to have a competitor too. It just makes you work harder. It galvanizes your team around going harder and faster and smarter. And so I always like to ask, like, who's the competitor you are truly obsessively watching and why? And that answer is very telling.
That makes sense. Let's talk about hiring mistakes. What are the big ones you
You're
observe?
gonna make them all. I made them all. In fact, for your senior talent, this is the one that was always hardest for me, which is like technically 2/3 of your most senior employees work. So like a C-level person, 66% of the time they're gonna work, which means, and that's good. That's like a good batting average, which means a third of the time you've worked for 6 months to bring on somebody very senior, and then it's just like a disaster. It's not the right fit. It doesn't work, and you got to start all over again. And so it's pretty demoralizing. So I look for in other people magnetism, talent magnet. They're good communicators. With AI, I always tell it we should teach all of our kids to be good communicators. It's one of the skills that's going to be critical. And so I look for people who can tell me, where do we need to go? Tell me how. Tell me why. How do we get there? And one of the hardest things as a CEO is you often have to tell people where to go when you have no idea. And for me in the rearview mirror, those are the toughest days for me personally, where you're standing in front of your whole team. I used to say, I could talk to tens of thousands of people I have, and I don't get nervous for 10 seconds. The only time I would ever get nervous was talking to our own team, because I cared so much, and I had to be like, here's where we need to go, and here's why. And I think you need people who, even in the face of complete uncertainty or ambiguity, can find certainty and ambiguity and clarify the ambiguity so you know where to go. And so we look for people who are great talent magnets, are great communicators, are visionary, and people want to follow them. And then here's the most important thing. And I have a podcast on Inc. Called For Starters. We're on season 6. I think I've now interviewed roughly 275 people, best CEOs on the planet. I've been so fortunate. Literally, you name a company, we've literally almost had all of them on. And I always ask, how'd you get here? And these are, Atlassian, 60, massive tens of billions of dollar businesses. And they will say, I hire the right people. And they're not being humble. It is just a fact. You have to be humble enough as a CEO to know that you do not know everything. You must hire smarter people than you are. And in fact, when CEOs don't hire people that are smarter than them, immediate red flag for me. Because I need to know, of course you're not going to know everything. I don't know. I still sitting here know very little about the world. You need people who are experts, who can push you, who can make you think twice about your own strategy. And so we look for people who hire brilliant people around them and then listen to them. And again, doesn't mean they always listen to them, but you gotta be able to upgrade the people around you and then listen about things they don't know. And I remember I was roughly 25, 26, and my entire management team was 35 to 45. I look back and I'm like, that's probably the best. That was probably the only reason we're successful, was I knew I didn't know shit. And I needed to hire people that did know things, and then listen to them. And they kind of knew the vision of where I wanted to go, and then would say, here's a shorter way to get there. And I'd be like, that was really smart. Let's do it that way. And again, like, I definitely wasn't perfect and got a lot of things wrong. But hiring people that are smarter than you, around you, in seat, who are more experienced, and then listening to them is a really pretty good strategy.
That makes sense. I interviewed Lindsay at Chief earlier today, and she brought up the point of your first 20 employees. Like, you got to get those right, because if you get it wrong, it compounds. Like, what was that like, finding the right 20 for LearnVest?
I was so lucky, guys. And I look back, and the team, I wish that we still have annual reunions, and I'm so close to all of them. And it was kind of crazy. But when we sold to Northwestern Mutual, a crazy number, and I don't want to misquote the stat, it was like 75% stayed for all 3 years. I mean, it was wild. But the first few teammates literally put their hand up and were like, I care about your mission. And they were like, my family went bankrupt, my dad lost his job, and here's why I want to join LearnVest. Or my family had a medical issue that was so, X, Y, and Z, that we had no money, and I want to build LearnVest. And people were so mission oriented and so committed to what we were building. And it's crazy. Some of those people were in my wedding, like closest friends on the planet. One of them, who joined early, married my husband's best friend and is one of our best friends. they were people who were lifers, and they joined for the right reasons. And I literally begged, can I pay $30,000 because we've raised $75,000? We have no money. And they'd be like, pay me when we make money. Like, and again, it was a different time. People were being laid off everywhere. So it was easy to come say, I want to do something and I want to learn. And tech didn't really exist. So the other thing is people were like, I want to learn about this thing. I'll take a gamble. Let's go. So yeah, the earliest team some of the best decisions I've made in my life.
That makes sense. What do you make of the current state of New York City tech?
So first, I'm really proud. If I go back to 15 years ago, it has just blossomed. The thing I remember, guys, I went to a meetup. It was like the saddest meetup you've ever seen in your life. It was at NYU. I'm pretty sure there were like 9 of us, and we were like, I mean, it really is amazing. I think Dennis from Foursquare was there. Like, we were literally just like one cup of coffee that we shared, and I look back and I'm like, that was like our big event. Like, what? No, I couldn't be prouder. It's just, what I'm most proud of is incredible repeat entrepreneurs from the West Coast. Where do you think they move to start their second company? New York goddamn city. They're like, hello, New York. And I think that we have such an interesting ecosystem because you have the cross culture of everything: finance, healthcare, real estate, media, not only tech, data, hedge funds. Like, we have such incredible ingredients. And so if I think about the entire thesis under Inspired was that in the future, the next Sequoia is going to be born in New York City. And I'm long New York for the next 50 years. And I really do think that some of the biggest problems that the world's facing come at the intersection of big societal issues, which I don't have to say that. We all know we're in the middle of a big I think the next decade is going to tell a lot about how society evolves. And I think that, having people that have multiple perspectives, I think you get that in New York City. And I think those are some of the problem solvers we need really activated. So deeply proud of New York, very committed to New York. Inspired's going to be in New York. And I think that the ecosystem also really helps each other. That's one other thing is we are less competitive here. We are more cooperative. I think we actually show up in a coopetition almost manner where I'm going to help you and maybe we have to compete, but I'm also going to help you. And I think it goes for investors too. Yeah. Thank you. Mike.
How is VC evolving and how does it impact early stage founders?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 types of venture right now. I think you have, we call it the cottage industry. It's your smaller funds that are really, really dedicated to a category, early stage or, Series B, or but they're very dedicated to something. And then you have the huge asset managers. GC $8 billion is their latest fund that they announced, I think, yesterday. Those are very, very different types of capital, and I think they're playing very different games. A big capital partner, and them all, the Andreessens, they can play a very different strategy. They can, focus on a 2x, and that's still really good returns ultimately. So they can't miss the right company, which is why they'll place a bunch of bets. You have the early stage, which is us, where it's our life's work. We're looking for 5 to 10x funds. We're trying to have huge outliers. So we look to back big swinging ideas. We are an N of 1 investor. So if we invest in that one category, we don't look at anybody else. It's like, that's our bet. We are all behind you. And so they're different games. And I think it's really helpful for anybody in this room who's building a company, starting a company, to really understand the different strategies, because they can, and we don't have to go into it in detail, but they can really impact your business based on what you're trying to accomplish. They can either be, they both can be helpful, but depending on what you care about, you should figure out which path is best for you.
That makes sense. You founded LearnVest to help people with their personal finance. What personal finance mistakes do you see founders make?
Great question. I think that, first of all, if your business is really, really, really working, call me. I will do financial planning for you, and estate planning, and just get you to the right people. I think, betting on yourself is the most valuable thing you can do in this world. It really is. And if you are someone who is going to work really hard every day, bet on yourself. And then have stick-to-itiveness. And I think the biggest mistake we find is I really do tell every founder we back, I'm like, I want you mentally to think this is at least 15 years. And I have this point of view, which is if you do the same thing every day for 15 years and you show up every day with 150%, you're allowed to go home at 3 p.m. on days where you get punched in the face more than once. But if you do that for a long period of time, and literally Ever and I were just having the most wonderful minute because I was like, 6 years ago, we invested in Row. And I was like, just look how far, like, first of all, look at these sick hats. But I was like, look how far.
We're actually a hat company.
The returns are sick. No, I was like, it's been 6 years. Look how far you've come. And I said to him, I can't wait to see like what the next 10 years are. And again, like, and I think the biggest mistake that founders make is quitting. That's the biggest financial mistake that they make. If you're onto something that matters, have stick-to-itiveness. I think it's one of the unsung traits that matters more than anything, and just the ability to iterate rapidly towards what's working.
Okay, let's say in an example, I'm a founder and I'm, for whatever reason, product is struggling and just I'm not seeing the traction that I want. And those voices in my head are saying like, maybe we should consider quitting and getting that job at Morgan Stanley. Aside from believing in yourself, are there other things that, any other pieces of advice you would give to people?
Yeah, you follow the data. I used to say to everybody, my opinion doesn't matter. Even as CEO, my opinion doesn't matter. What do the data say? Like, do customers like this or not? Is it saying do more of this, or is it saying hell no, this is terrible? Like no one wants to pay us for it. Follow the data. And so I think in some ways it's very freeing, and just be relentless about like following what's working. And it when I was just with a founder right before this who was like, oh my God, when I finally found my ICP, you feel the business pull you, because all of a sudden it's like, yes, things are getting easier. Customers say, yes, I'll pay you over and over. And you're like, something's working. So you know when it's not working because it's miserable and it's not working every day. And you go home at 3 o'clock. So again, like stick-to-itiveness, really digging into being honest with yourself on, is this working or not? And if it's not, then try 6 more things. Keep iterating. The last thing I'll just say, I think some of the best founders in this environment with AI and everything else moving at such rapid paces, you want to iterate and think about iterating hourly and daily and the number of tests you can run. And, it's not A/B test one versus, it's like multivariate testing. How do we test 100 things? You're not going to be right. So let the data show you so more tests. I think the best businesses are testing machines.
As an early stage investor, pretty much you're trying to underwrite seed to Series A. What advice do you have for folks that are currently in their pre-seed or seed stage to maximize their chances of making it to Series A and beyond?
First of all, find the right investors. Again, back to like, this is a cottage industry. Like we all know each other really, really well. Like Samir, who runs Excel, was on my board, and like, it just, I'm giving you an example. Like it's a small community at the end of the day. There may be hundreds of funds, but they're not run by millions of people. They're run by like 1,000 people. It's not a lot of people. So I think making sure that you find someone who's a really good partner to you, who's really going to put you first, who's going to tell you what you need to hear, and then make sure that the business is getting to a place it needs to, and then help open doors for you. I always say at Inspired, our job is helping you get access to all the right people on the timeline that you want. That is our job. That is our value add to you, which is, okay, we know so-and-so loves this. And so I'm going to get you to so-and-so and you to so-and-so and you to so-and-so because I know that they're going to like your business. And that's our job. So again, I really do think just as anything in life, you want to marry the right partner. And that makes a lot of things a lot easier.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you.